Sign it, sweetie. You've got nothing to lose anyway. That's what my fiancée said to me 3 days before our wedding, as she slid a $2 pen across a mahogany table. Behind her stood her maid of honor, my ex-best friend, wearing a ring I never gave her. I signed all 41 pages with a smile. What she never read was Clause 7, the one my lawyer wrote. And 3 days after that, at the altar, in front of 240 guests, when the officiant read it aloud, her father was the first man to his feet. And he was not clapping. She slid the pen across the table without looking at me. It wasn't a good pen. It was a thin plastic ballpoint, the kind you find in a jar by a bank teller's window, the cap chewed soft at one end. Her family had Mont Blancs. 3 of them stood in a row on the credenza behind her father, like small black monuments to everything they were and everything I was not. But the pen she pushed toward me rolled across the wood and came to rest against my knuckles, and she said, without a single trace of cruelty in her voice, which was somehow so much worse than cruelty, "Sign it, sweetie. You've got nothing to lose anyway." The room laughed, not loudly. A soft, well-bred ripple, the kind of laughter that costs the people making it nothing at all. Her father chuckled into his bourbon. Her mother smiled down at the flower arrangement, as though it had told the joke. And across the table, standing just behind Vanessa's right shoulder in a cream silk blouse, was the maid of honor, my oldest friend in the world, Grace Bellamy. The woman I had known for 19 years, the woman I had once bought a ring for and never found the nerve to give. She was wearing a ring now. It just wasn't mine. It caught the afternoon light coming off the harbor through those tall Charleston windows. A hard, bright point of white on her left hand, and I looked at it for exactly 1 second, and then I made myself look away. Because a man learns in moments like that he has about 1 second to decide whether he is going to survive the next hour or drown in it. I had already decided. I had decided weeks before, alone, in the dark, in a room nobody in that family ever bothered to enter. The document in front of me was 41 pages. A prenuptial agreement, drafted by the Whitmore family's attorneys, a firm on Broad Street that had been guarding this family's money since before I was born. And I had already read every word of it. Twice. I read it the way my father taught me to read a set of blueprints before you ever trust a building with your weight. Slowly, with a pencil, looking for the place where the load actually goes. I want to be honest with you about what I felt, sitting there, because it matters for everything that comes after. I did not feel humiliated. I had already been through the humiliation in private weeks earlier, and I had come out the far side of it into something much quieter and much harder to see from the outside. So I picked up the cheap pen, and I signed. Every page. 41 sets of initials and 1 full signature in the steady hand my father gave me, while Vanessa watched me the way you watch a delivery man carry a heavy box up the stairs, patiently, distantly, waiting for it to be finished so she could get on with her life. I signed page 7 exactly the way I signed all the others. I did not pause on it. I did not let my hand slow. I signed it the way an innocent man signs his own erasure, and I smiled while I did it. Here is what Vanessa did not read, because she had stopped reading me a long, long time before. On page 7 of that agreement was a clause her attorneys had glanced at and waved through, a dry little paragraph about mutual disclosure and pre-existing obligations, the kind of language that puts wealthy people gently to sleep. My own attorney had written it, a woman named Miriam Adler, who is, to this day, the most dangerous person I have ever paid by the hour. Clause 7. 14 lines long. And in 3 days, at the altar of the Cathedral of the Holy Redeemer, in front of 240 guests, a string quartet, and a wedding planner named Bitsy who had flown in from Atlanta, that clause was going to be read out loud. And when it was, Vanessa's father would be the first man on his feet. He would not be clapping. My name is Ethan Cole. I'm 39 years old. I grew up in a rented house in Marion, Ohio, the son of a carpenter who died owing $11,000 and left behind the finest set of hand tools I have ever held. I'm not a dramatic man. I've spent my whole life being the calm one, the steady one, the man who reads the fine print so no one else has to. And I need you to stay with me all the way to the end of this, because the story of how a carpenter's son ended up owning the ground beneath one of the oldest fortunes in Charleston is not the story you think it is. It is not a story about money at all. I met Vanessa Whitmore on a Tuesday in the spring of 2018, 40 feet in the air, on the south face of a crumbling antebellum warehouse she had just bought and had no earthly idea how to save. I was the structural engineer her contractor had called in as a last resort. The building was a beautiful catastrophe. A historic cotton warehouse down near the old wharves that every sensible person in the city had told her to bulldoze. She had refused. I remember climbing the scaffold to where she stood in a hard hat 2 sizes too big for her, a roll of drawings tucked under one arm, the wind off the harbor pulling at her hair. And instead of asking me whether the building could be saved, she looked me dead in the eye and asked me how. That one word told me everything about her. She was not a woman who wanted to be reassured. She was a woman who wanted to understand. In my experience, that is the rarest quality a person can have, and the most beautiful. And I have never entirely recovered from meeting it in her. She was the sharpest person in every room she entered, and she did not so much enter rooms as quietly reorganize them around herself. But I want to be clear, that is not why I fell in love with her. I fell in love with her on the 4th day of that project, when I came back after hours for a tool I'd forgotten, and found her sitting alone in the dust of that half-dead building at 7 in the evening, long after the crew had gone home. She was running her hand along one of the old hot pine beams, slow and careful, and she was talking to it, quietly. She didn't know I was there. She was telling that building in a low voice that she was sorry it had been left alone so long, and that she was going to bring it back. I stood in the shadow of the doorway and I did not breathe, because I understood in that moment that I had met someone who loved the same things I loved, in the same broken, stubborn, wordless way. My father used to talk to wood like that, as if it could hear him, as if it deserved his respect. I need you to hold on to that image of her, because I need you to believe that woman was real. The Vanessa who cried at the animal shelter commercials and blamed her allergies. The Vanessa who couldn't fall asleep unless the closet door was shut all the way. Who kept a photograph of her grandmother folded in her wallet. Who once drove 90 minutes each way through a thunderstorm to bring me soup when I had the flu, and then fell asleep bolt upright in my kitchen chair because she was too proud to admit how tired she was. That woman existed. I did not invent her to make this story hurt more. And that, in the end, is what has made all of it so much harder to carry. The Whitmores were old Charleston. Not the loud, new money that buys a place on Kiowa and a boat to match it. The quiet, 300-year, lethal kind. Whitmore and Vale had been in property since the Cotton days, and Harrison Whitmore, Vanessa's father, presided over the whole of it from a corner office in a building his great-great-grandfather had raised with slave-bought bricks and a family name he wore like armor. The first time Vanessa brought me to Sunday dinner at the house south of Broad, Harrison shook my hand, glanced down at my shoes, and asked me what my father had done for a living. When I told him, he said, "Carpentry is honest work," in the exact, gentle tone a man uses to close a door so softly that you still hear the latch catch. I was never going to be one of them. I knew that from the first handshake. And here is the thing they never understood about me. I did not want to be. I had built my own quiet life, brick by brick, and I was proud of every brick. After my father died, I put myself through Ohio State. I framed houses in the summers. I co-founded a small structural forensics firm in Columbus with 2 friends. And in 2016, we sold it to a national engineering group for more money than I had ever let myself imagine. And I did something with that money that no one in a house south of Broad would ever have guessed by looking at my 10-year-old truck. I did not spend it. I invested it, carefully, silently, patiently. Because my father had died owing $11,000 to men in suits, and I'd made a promise, standing in the mud at his graveside with the rain coming down, that I would never again in my life be at the mercy of a man in a suit. So I understood money in a way the Whitmores never once suspected, because I understood, in my bones, what it was to have none. That, it turns out, is a kind of knowledge that the very wealthy almost never acquire. They know how to spend money, and they know how to display it. They have no idea how it actually moves in the dark. They don't know how debt breathes. They don't know that a great fortune can be nothing but a beautiful painted facade with nothing behind it but termites and pride. For 4 years, Vanessa and I were happy. Genuinely, deeply happy. I helped her save that first warehouse and then 11 more buildings after it. I became the quiet man behind the Whitmore restorations, the one who could lay a hand on a 200-year-old wall and tell you which parts were holding the weight and which parts were only pretending to. I should have paid closer attention to that particular skill of mine. It turns out it applies to a great deal more than walls, because somewhere in the last 18 months of our life together, something inside the Whitmore house had quietly begun to pretend. It started with her father. Harrison Whitmore began appearing at our house on the peninsula more and more often, and never warmly. He would arrive unannounced in the middle of a weekday in a car that cost more than the house I grew up in, and he would spend an hour behind the closed door of Vanessa's study and then leave without finishing the drink she'd poured him. Afterward, I would find her standing at the tall front window with her arms crossed tight over her chest, staring out at the street as though she were doing arithmetic she didn't like the answer to. When I asked what her father had wanted, she would say, "Business," in a voice that had a wall built into the middle of it, and I would let it go, because I was the calm one, and the calm one always lets it go. Then the wedding accelerated. That is the only word I have for it. Vanessa and I had been engaged for more than a year with no particular hurry, no fixed date, an easy, open horizon we both seemed content to leave open. And then, almost overnight, there was a date, and a cathedral, and a deposit on the family's own event property out on the Ashley, and a wedding planner with a headset and a binder. Harrison was paying for all of it. Every rose, every string, every silver fork. And that, more than anything, should have told me the truth. Because Vanessa was 34 years old and so fiercely independent that in 6 years I had never once seen her let her father buy her so much as a cup of coffee. When I said as much, gently, one night in bed, she rolled away from me toward the shut closet door and said, "It makes him happy, Ethan. Let him have this one thing." And I let it go. I was becoming very, very good at letting things go. I cataloged the changes without meaning to. It is a habit of my profession. You notice the small deviations, the settling, the hairline movements that tell you where the stress is really traveling. A new coolness in her, with no fight behind it and no source I could name. A phone that used to lie face up on every table in our house, for emergencies, she'd always said, now lived face down, in her hand, in her pocket, under her pillow. A perfume I did not recognize and had not bought, and a new habit, a small and specific one, that I could not explain to myself no matter how many nights I lay awake trying. In front of other people, at dinners, at parties, at the club her family belonged to, she had begun, in tiny, practiced ways, to make me smaller. A joke about my truck. A light remark that I didn't really do the money side of things, bless him. The prenup itself. which she presented to me not as a cold legal formality, but as a kindness she was performing on my behalf.
"It protects you too, sweetie," she said, and the word sweetie had grown a thin, cold edge that had not been there a year before, a hairline crack running right through the middle of a word that used to be soft. I told myself it was the stress of the wedding. I told myself she was overwhelmed. I told myself a great many things, and I had a lifetime of practice in telling myself things, and every one of them let me keep the building standing one more day. And then Grace came back. Grace Bellamy had been my best friend since we were 19 years old. Two scholarship kids at Ohio State who found each other in a statics class and never really let go. For years, everyone assumed we would end up together, including, if I'm being honest with you, me. There was a night, 10 years ago now, in a fluorescent diner in Columbus with rain streaking the windows, when I had a ring in my jacket pocket and an entire speech built and waiting in my chest. And I looked across the cracked laminate table at her, and I lost my nerve. I told myself the timing was wrong. I told myself we were better as friends, that I was protecting the friendship. I never gave her the ring. 6 months later, she took a job in Savannah and moved away, and we drifted, the way people do, into Christmas cards and the occasional late phone call. And then I met Vanessa on a scaffold in the wind, and life closed over that diner booth like harbor water closing over a dropped stone. So when Vanessa told me, bright and casual over breakfast, that her maid of honor was going to be an old college friend of mine, a woman named Grace who had just moved to Charleston, I felt the floor tilt very slightly under my feet. And when Grace walked into the engagement luncheon with a diamond on her left hand, engaged to a smooth and handsome property investor named Preston Vale, I hugged her and told her I was happy for her. And I meant it, and it also felt exactly like swallowing a stone whole. The ring I never gave her, on another man's account now. I had no claim on Grace. I understood that. A man does not get to grieve a door he closed with his own hand. But there is a particular, quiet loneliness in watching the life you did not choose walk into the room wearing someone else's diamond and stand as your bride's maid of honor at your own wedding, to a woman who has started saying sweetie like a small closing door. And Preston Vale. I should tell you about Preston, because he is the crack that ran all the way to the footing. Son of the Vale in Whitmore and Vale, 40 years old, all charm and cufflinks, and a name that remembered nothing about you but itself. Engaged to Grace, a groomsman at my wedding by some arrangement of the families, and a man who could not, I had begun to notice, quite keep his eyes off my bride. I found out on a Thursday, 3 weeks before the wedding. And I found out the way people always find out, by accident, in the middle of an ordinary chore, because the universe has no sense of drama at all, only timing. Vanessa had left her tablet on the kitchen island, still logged in, a message thread open on the screen because she'd been arguing with herself about a seating chart. I was not looking for anything. I need you to believe that because it is true, and it matters to me that you believe it. I picked the tablet up only to move it out of the way so I could set down 2 paper bags of groceries, and the screen was bright, and a name was sitting at the top of that open thread, cradled in a kind of language that no one on this earth uses with a business partner. Preston. I did not scroll for long. I did not need to. Some sentences you only have to read once, and they quietly rearrange every piece of furniture in your entire life. There were months of them. Hotel names, a room number that repeated, small jokes about getting through the wedding. And then one line from Vanessa, sent at 11:40 on a night she had told me she was at a hospital fundraiser, that I will carry with me into the ground. Once it's done and the families are locked in, we won't have to hide anymore. Daddy gets his merger, and I get you. Daddy gets his merger. I set the tablet back down, very gently, exactly where it had been, at exactly the same angle, the groceries still hanging from my other arm, the cold of the refrigerated things beginning to bleed through the paper against my hip. And I stood in the middle of my own kitchen, and I want to tell you honestly what I felt in that moment, because I think it is the single most important thing in this entire story. I did not feel rage. I've told this part to a few people since, and every one of them expected rage, and I understand why. Rage is the clean and cinematic thing. Rage is what the story is supposed to want. But what came over me, standing there in the last light of that Thursday afternoon, was grief. The deep, quiet, structural kind. The kind an engineer feels in his chest when he finally understands that the crack in the wall was never cosmetic, that it runs all the way down, past the plaster, past the studs, into the footing itself, and that the building he has loved and labored to save has been condemned from the inside for a very long time. And he is the only one who didn't know, because now I understood the whole shape of it all at once, with a completeness that took the air out of the room. The sudden wedding, Harrison's closed-door visits, the rush, the money, the word merger. This was never a marriage. It was a corporate transaction wearing a wedding dress. Whitmore and Vale needed to become Whitmore Vale permanently. Two feuding old fortunes fused, bloodline and balance sheet, before anyone outside the family looked too closely at why the Whitmore accounts had grown so quiet. And Vanessa was the instrument of it, and Preston was the golden boy on the far side of the deal, and the two of them, pushed together by their fathers across a boardroom table, had fallen into each other somewhere along the way. And I was the cover story. I was the safe, modest, respectable fiancé that a wealthy family parades to make a rushed and complicated arrangement look like a love match. I was the honest carpenter's son they could point to at the country club. Marry the nice engineer, keep Preston close, right there in the wedding party, hidden in plain sight as the business partner's son. Let the two families quietly slide together under cover of the most beautiful wedding Charleston had seen in a decade, while no one in the city thought to ask why. And then, standing there in that kitchen with the ice cream softening against my side, the floor tilted a second time, and I understood something that changed the entire direction of what I was about to do. If Vanessa belonged to Preston, then Grace, my Grace, the diamond on another man's account, the maid of honor in the cream silk blouse, Grace was exactly what I was. She was the other cover story. She was the second honest person tied to the wrong end of this arrangement, being married for the sake of appearances by someone whose heart had already been signed over to someone else. Preston did not love Grace any more than Vanessa loved me. We were the same, Grace and I. Two decent, steady, trusting people that two clever people had chosen precisely because we were decent and steady and trusting. We just didn't know it yet. She didn't know it at all. I did not confront Vanessa that night. I want to be honest about that, because it is the thing people question the most. I did not throw the tablet across the room. I did not wake her demanding answers. I put the groceries away. I made dinner, a roast chicken, her mother's recipe, the one she liked. I asked her how the seating charts were going, and I watched her lie to my face across our own table with an ease so practiced, so smooth and warm and complete that it told me she had been doing it for the better part of a year. And I understood, finally, and all the way down, that the woman who once sat in the dust and talked to a dying building was not going to be reached by anything I could possibly say across a plate of chicken. So I said nothing. Instead, at 11 o'clock that night, after she had gone to sleep with the closet door shut all the way she liked it, I went quietly down to the small office off the garage, the room she called my engineering cave, with that fond, dismissive little smile she reserved for the parts of me she considered beneath serious attention. I sat down at the desk,
I opened the bottom drawer, and I took out a plain manila folder that I had, as it happened, begun building 2 full years before I ever had a single reason to. Because that is the thing about being the man who reads the fine print. Sometimes you start reading it long before you understand why. 2 years before any of this, before there was a tablet or a merger or a $2 pen, I had noticed something. It was nothing dramatic. It was the kind of discrepancy that only a person like me would even see, and even then only because I had been trained since boyhood to look at things and ask what was really holding them up. I had been hired to do a routine structural assessment on the crown jewel of the entire Whitmore portfolio, an enormous historic estate on a bluff over the Ashley River that the family called, simply and grandly, the River House. It was their flagship, their pride. The building Harrison brought clients to, the one printed on the firm's letterhead, the backdrop of every family Christmas card for 100 years. And while I was pulling the property records to trace the old foundation history, I found something that had nothing to do with foundations at all. I found the debt. The River House was mortgaged to the rafters, refinanced, then refinanced again, and then wrapped in a third and heavier layer, a private mezzanine loan out of a fund in Charlotte, at terms that told a very particular story to anyone who knew the language. And I knew the language. The story those numbers told was this. This family is not what it looks like. This family is spending money it no longer has to maintain the appearance of money it used to have. This beautiful old fortune is a painted facade, and behind it, the termites are winning. I did not tell a soul. It was not my business. I filed my structural report. The foundation, for the record, was sound, and I drove home in my 10-year-old truck. But I could not unsee it. And over the following months, quietly, the way I watch everything, I watched. And what I watched was a slow-motion collapse hidden behind 300 years of good manners and monogrammed napkins. The mezzanine loan slipped into technical default. The fund up in Charlotte wanted out, but they did not want the ugliness of foreclosing on a beloved old Charleston family, the headlines, the reputational stain. What they wanted was to sell the note to someone else and walk away clean. So they did. Through a broker, quietly, for 41 cents on the dollar. They sold it to Longleaf Holdings, LLC. I own Longleaf Holdings. I formed it years ago to hold the careful, silent investments I built out of the money from selling my firm, the ones I never once mentioned in a house south of Broad. There is no coal anywhere in the name. There is nothing on the paperwork that connects it to a carpenter's son in a battered truck. And on an ordinary morning 2 springs ago, without a single member of the Whitmore family ever knowing it had happened, I became the holder of the note on the River House. I became, in the plainest possible words, the Whitmore's creditor, the man who owned the ground beneath the family's pride. Now, I have to stop here and be straight with you because if you are a thoughtful person, and I believe that you are, or you would not still be listening, there's a question forming in your chest right now, and it deserves an honest answer. Was that ethical? Buying the secret debt of the family my fiancée belonged to while I was engaged to marry her. Did I do that on purpose? Was it a trap I laid? Here's the truth, and I need you to hear it. No, it was not. When I bought that note, I was going to marry Vanessa Whitmore. I loved her. And my quiet plan, the real one, the one I told no one, not even Miriam, was that one day, after we were married, when the family finally broke down and admitted they were drowning, I would step forward out of the shadows. I would restructure that debt on terms no vulture fund on earth would ever offer. I would save the River House, the way I had saved that first ruined warehouse, and I would do it as a wedding gift to a family that had looked down at my shoes. And I would never once let Harrison Whitmore feel the shame of it. I would just quietly be the thing that held his world up, and let him go on believing he'd held it up himself. That was the plan. I became their creditor in order to become their rescuer. I only changed the plan on the night I read that tablet. The next morning, I called Miriam Adler. Miriam had drafted my will, my business papers, the documents for Longleaf. She is 66 years old. She has never lost a fight that mattered. And when I finished telling her everything, she asked me exactly 2 questions. Did I have proof? And did I want to hurt Vanessa or protect myself? I told her I did not want to hurt anyone. I told her that what I wanted, the only thing I wanted, was for the truth to arrive on its own in the daylight in front of everyone at the exact moment they were most certain they had won. She was quiet on the line for a long moment, and then she said, "Then we don't fight the prenup, Ethan. We use it." Because Vanessa's attorneys had made the one mistake arrogant people always make. They had assumed. They had assumed I was nothing, so they never once audited my side of the disclosures. And a prenuptial agreement under South Carolina law requires full and fair financial disclosure from both parties. So Miriam wrote Clause 7, 14 dry, sleepy lines, incorporating by reference an attached schedule of disclosure. And on my schedule, buried in an appendix no one on their side would ever bother to read, sat Longleaf Holdings, LLC, and its single most significant asset, the defaulted note on the River House, the Whitmore crown jewel, held in full by the groom. They signed it, every one of them. Harrison signed his own consent as a family principal without reading past the summary page. And Vanessa slid a $2 pen across a mahogany table and told me, laughing, that I had nothing to lose. And then she did the one last thing that turned the key in the lock. She decided that signing the prenup in private was not quite humiliating enough. She wanted it witnessed. She instructed the officiant to make the signing part of the wedding itself. A formal affirmation of the covenant, she called it. A reading aloud at the altar, before God and 240 guests, of the key terms both parties had signed. A public crowning of the arrangement. Proof in front of all of Charleston that Ethan Cole entered this marriage with nothing and claimed nothing and knew his place. She built the stage herself. She wrote the moment, blocked it, cast it, and lit it. She simply did not know which clause the officiant would reach. The Cathedral of the Holy Redeemer holds 300 people, and on the morning of my wedding, it was full. I want to describe it to you the way I still see it, because I have walked through that morning in my mind more times than I could ever count. It was a flawless Charleston day in late spring, the kind that makes the whole city look like a painting of itself. The light came down through the tall windows in long gold columns, thick enough to hold in your hand. There were white roses everywhere, more roses than I have ever seen inside one building, spilling off the ends of the pews, banked up around the altar. $18,000 of roses, I would learn later, paid for by a family that owed 41 cents on every dollar of its own name. The string quartet played something soft and old. Bitsy from Atlanta hovered in the wings with her headset like a Secret Service agent guarding a president. And I stood at the front of it all in a suit Vanessa had chosen for me, waiting for a woman who did not love me to walk down the aisle toward a marriage that was really a merger, past a groomsman who was her actual lover, in front of a maid of honor who was, like me, the very last person in that room to know the truth. Grace stood across from me at the altar in a pale green dress. Once, just before the music began, she caught my eye, and she gave me a small, uncertain smile. The smile of a friend who senses something is wrong in a room and can't find it. And I very nearly broke. I nearly crossed that altar and told her everything right there. But you cannot save a person 30 seconds before the thing they need saving from. So I only smiled back at her, and I held her gaze 1 second longer than I needed to.
and I prayed that in an hour she would understand that the smile had been an apology and a promise.
Vanessa came down the aisle on her father's arm, and she was, I will not pretend otherwise, the most beautiful I had ever seen her. Harrison walked beside her the way a man walks when he is personally delivering the signature on the most important deal of his life, because that is precisely what he believed he was doing. To my left, 4 feet away, Preston Vale stood in his groomsman's suit and watched his real bride glide down the aisle to marry his cover story. And I watched him watch her, and I felt the last slow wave of grief move up through my chest and out through the top of my head. And then it was simply gone. And I was calm, calmer than I have ever been in my life, before or since. The calm of a man standing on a foundation he poured himself in the dark 2 years ago. The ceremony moved forward. The readings, the vows, which we spoke and which I will not dishonor by repeating here. And then Reverend Atwater, a kind and slightly nervous man with reading glasses pushed up into his gray hair, came to the part Vanessa had added to the script. He explained to the congregation, a little haltingly, that the couple wished to publicly affirm the agreement they had entered into as a testament, he said, to the joining of 2 lives and 2 families. I saw Harrison sit up straighter in the front pew. I saw the small, proud, satisfied smile settle onto his face, the smile of a man about to watch the carpenter's son be publicly crowned with nothing. Reverend Atwater slid his glasses down onto his nose. He read the summary terms first, that Ethan Cole waived all claim to the Whitmore family assets. A soft, pleased murmur moved through the front rows like a breeze through the roses. Vanessa's mouth curved just slightly at the corner. And then the Reverend, being a careful and thorough man, and having been handed the full executed document by the coordinator rather than the summary, turned the page and kept reading. Because no one had thought to tell him where to stop. And he arrived, in his clear and carrying voice, at the clause marked 7. Both parties, he read, and the words climbed up into the stone vaults and hung there. Affirm all material financial interests and pre-existing obligations between them and their respective families, as set forth in the attached schedules, including but not limited to the interest held by Longleaf Holdings, LLC, in the property known as the River House, by way of the mezzanine note currently in default, and held by the said Longleaf Holdings, LLC, an entity wholly owned and controlled by the groom, Ethan Cole. For one long moment, nothing happened at all. 240 people who did not speak the language of finance heard a wall of dry words wash over them and waited, politely, for it to be finished. But there were 4 people in that cathedral who understood exactly what had just been spoken aloud. In the 8th row, Miriam Adler quietly folded her hands in her lap. Behind the family, Vanessa's attorney went absolutely still, the way a rabbit goes still. On the groom's side, Preston Vale's father made a small, strangled sound, like a man struck flat in the chest. And Harrison Whitmore rose to his feet. He came up so fast that the pew rocked and knocked against the one behind it. He was the color of old paper. He was not applauding, because in that single sentence, read aloud by a nervous minister in the gold light, in front of every person whose opinion had ever mattered to him in his life, the thing Harrison Whitmore had spent 2 years and one daughter's entire future trying to bury, had walked calmly out into the center aisle and turned to face the room. The empire was hollow. The River House was in default. And the man who owned the ground beneath 300 years of Charleston pride was the carpenter's son whose shoes he had glanced down at, standing at the altar in the suit his daughter had picked, in the last golden seconds before the whole facade came down. He looked at me, not with anger, with the specific, dawning horror of a man watching a wall he has leaned on his whole life fall slowly away,
and realizing he is standing inside the building.
I turned from Harrison to Vanessa. She was staring at me, and for the first time in 18 months, she was actually seeing me. I watched her run the whole thing backward in a single held breath. The note, the LLC, the clause she'd never read, the $2 pen. You've got nothing to lose anyway. And I watched her understand all at once that I had known. That I had known all of it the whole time. That the safe, quiet, modest man had been the one truly load-bearing wall in the entire building, and she had spent a year carving her initials into me, certain I was nothing but a weight she could finally set down. I did not shout. I did not gloat. People are always a little disappointed when I tell them that, and I understand why. But a man who has already grieved has nothing left to prove in a cathedral. I leaned in close enough that only she could hear, exactly the way she had once leaned into me across a table, and I said the only thing there was to say. You should have read page 7, sweetie. Then I slid the wedding ring off my finger, the ring I had not yet given her, and I set it down gently on the open pages of the Reverend's book. And I turned, and I walked back down that long aisle, past 240 guests, past a father who could neither stand nor sit, past a lover in a groomsman's suit whose entire future had just been read aloud in the house of God. And I walked out into the perfect Charleston morning. And I did not walk out alone, because halfway down the aisle, without a single word, Grace Bellamy stepped out of her place beside the altar, and she fell into step beside me. 2 cover stories, walking out of the same lie into the light. The wedding, of course, did not happen. What happened instead was a collapse that had been coming for 2 years and simply chose that morning to arrive. Within a month, the truth about Whitmore and Vale was in the business pages. The merger died in a week, 2 old families dissolving into lawsuits after 300 years of pretending to like each other. Preston's engagement to Grace ended in a parking lot. She told me later she never even raised her voice. She just handed him back the ring and asked him to be gone by Sunday. And the River House. I want to tell you I saved it. Because I did. I restructured the note through Longleaf on fair terms and let Harrison keep the building because I discovered, when it was finally mine to take, that I did not want it. I never had. I only ever wanted the truth to stand up in the daylight where everyone could see it. And it had. Vanessa came to see me 4 months later. I was up in the Blue Ridge by then, in a small cabin I'd bought with cash and was restoring myself, board by board, the way my father would have. She drove up on a Wednesday with no armor left. Jeans, flat shoes, her hair down. A woman learning to stand without the scaffolding of a name that no longer meant what it used to. She sat on my porch steps, and she told me all of it. Her father's failing firm, the plan to marry her off to make the merger look like love, and how, somewhere in the middle of executing it, she and Preston had stopped pretending. Why? I asked her at last. Not with anger, with something closer to a need to understand. You saw a dying building in the dust and knew how to save it. Why couldn't you see this one coming down? She was quiet for a long time. The wind moved through the pines. Because I stopped seeing you, she said. You were so steady I stopped checking whether you were still there. Preston looked at me like I was a rescue. You looked at me like I was already saved. She let out one short, broken breath. I confused being wanted with being loved. And by the time I understood the difference, I'd signed my name to the ruin of the only person who ever actually loved me. I did not comfort her. I did not perform my old pain for her either. I have learned there is a quiet dignity in refusing to do both. I told her I hoped she'd build something honest with whatever was left. And I meant it. And then I watched her drive back down the mountain, and the last of the grief lifted off my chest and went out into the trees, and it has never once come back. Grace and I did not fall into each other's arms at the church door. Life is not a movie, and neither of us was fit to be trusted with a second heart that spring. But we talked, on the phone, the way we had at 19. And slowly, over about a year, something that had been interrupted a dozen ago in a diner booth quietly picked itself back up. I still have the ring, the one I bought all those years ago and never gave her. It's in the top drawer of a dresser I built with my own hands, in a cabin I rebuilt with my own hands, on a mountain where nobody has ever heard the name Whitmore. I haven't given it to her yet, but when I do, and I will, it will be because I finally learned the thing this whole story was trying to teach me. You do not wait. You do not hedge. You do not confuse being safe with being present. You look at the people you love while they are still in the room. You do not read the fine print of your own life 10 years too late. Here is what I know now, standing on a porch I built. A carpenter's son who owned the ground beneath a fortune and gave it back because it was never what he wanted. Being underestimated is not an insult. It is a position. The people who look down at your shoes will never once check whether you are the strongest thing holding up the house they live in. And when they finally hand you the cheap pen and tell you that you have nothing to lose, the only thing left to do is smile and sign and let them find out at the altar what you already knew in the quiet. Before I let you go, I need to ask you something, because I've carried it a long time and I truly want to know where you land. Comment 1 if you believe I was right to stay silent and let the truth stand up on its own at the altar, that some betrayals are best answered with patience instead of a scene. Comment 2 if you think I should have confronted Vanessa the night I read that tablet, that she deserved to see my face when I understood, and I robbed us both of something by waiting. Comment 3 if you think I waited far too long from the very start, that the signs were there for 18 months, and a man who reads the fine print for a living should have trusted himself sooner. And tell me where you're listening from tonight. What city, what country, what time it is where you are right now. Every single one of them means something to me. And if you have ever been the quiet one, the steady one, the reliable one, the person everybody stopped checking on because you always handled everything. If you have ever been handed the cheap pen and told you have nothing to lose, I need you to hear this before you go. You are not the weight in someone else's house. You may be the only wall still standing. Leave a single word in the comments if any part of this found you tonight. And if it did, subscribe, because there are more of these coming. The uncomfortable, honest kind. The ones that always end somewhere worth arriving. This is a fictional story inspired by real emotional experiences, fully reimagined and set in Charleston, South Carolina to create original content. Any resemblance to actual people or events is coincidental.